What's happening, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Adam. This is Vancity Audi, and we're back with my MK8 GTI for a tuner battle continuation. Last time you guys saw me on the channel, I was talking about my subjective review on what I thought of the pump gas tunes on my car. Today, we're ramping it up even further with Stage 1 E85 low torque tunes. Let's get into it. Disclaimer number 1. All dynos read differently. That's why if you go to each of these different companies' websites, every single reading on all of their dynos on a MK8 GTI, all of their stock power levels are different. They vary over 30 wheel horsepower. I think it's 37 to be exact, from the lowest to the highest reading. So just know that there are a ton of variables that come into play when looking at power generated on a dyno. The weather conditions, the elevation, the quality of fuel, the dyno brand, the calibration done on the dyno, so many different things. So just know that the power that we're generating today on this dyno might not be the same as everybody else's dyno figures at your particular dyno wherever you may live. You also need to take into account some dynos read power at the wheels, other dynos read power at the crank or brake horsepower. Those are not the same thing. Wheel horsepower does not take into effect the drivetrain loss that you're suffering. So when you have a crank horsepower or a brake horsepower readout on a dyno, they've added in your drivetrain loss. The dynos that I use in my videos read wheel horsepower. Disclaimer number 2, I cannot control the environmental conditions that we are testing in. I'll do the best that I possibly can to get through this testing from one tune to the next, so not too much time takes place between those runs, because if I wait too long and the temperatures get much higher, that means that it'll probably be at a disadvantage for those tunes that I'm testing later in the day. On some days we may get extremely lucky, where the temperature and the density altitude doesn't vary very much between the day. But other days you might start out at a very cold temperature, warming up throughout the day to a much warmer temperature. The tunes that you test in the morning might have an advantage over the tunes you test later in the day, simply due to those environmental conditions changing. Disclaimer number 3, this is simply a dyno test and nothing more. This does not account for drivability, smoothness, refinement, nothing. It is simply a 4th gear pull at wide open throttle from anywhere between 2,000 to 2,500 RPM all the way to red line. That's all you're really experiencing on the dyno, nothing else. Disclaimer number 4, I cannot be certain of the software that is being provided to me by any of these companies. You should know that APR, Unitronic, and 034 Motorsport all only offer canned or off-the-shelf software, whereas Tunezilla and United Motorsport do offer custom software, but I have specifically requested to only get off-the-shelf or canned tunes from each of these companies. Disclaimer number 5, I am running all OEM hardware. It's safe to say and safe to assume if I was then to install some aftermarket performance hardware, my car would make more power on each of these tunes. But just know that right now I am completely stock performance hardware. The only things I have installed in the car are cosmetic or things that make a bit of noise, like the CTS turbo muffler delete, as well as their blow-off valve. Number 6, my TCU is locked. I am sorry to say that at this present time, my 2023 Volkswagen GTI still has a locked TCU, meaning that there is a torque limitation set by the manufacturer that I cannot surpass. With that being said, I'm unable to see whether the tunes that are provided to me are going to be riding that torque limit, or whether they're going to be set at a safer, lower torque limit and possibly give me a flatter torque curve. I'm not exactly sure the limitations on this transmission with it being locked, but all I know is there is the possibility that some companies are riding that torque limitation. Maybe it's going to be up and down a bit, and other ones may have played it a bit safer on the low torque tunes and flatten that out at a lower level. Number 7 is that I will try my best to let the data speak for itself. Now, I could go out in the back roads of Mexico and give you subjective information, being how well the car drives, how refined it feels, but that's coming from my opinion. In these videos, I'll try my best to just let the data speak for itself, what we see in terms of power and torque on the dyno running each of these different tunes. Number 8, the AFR or air to fuel ratio, or lambda, in each of these tunes may vary. Keep in mind that the leaner something might be in terms of AFR or lambda, it might make more power, but it might also affect the longevity of the motor itself. Whereas if a software company has decided to tune something on the richer side, the longevity of the motor might last a little longer. I'm not going to be sharing those or going over those those in this video series. And number 9, I will not be sharing any of the data logs that I capture on my Mark 8 during this entire process with the public. The reason being is each of these companies spent a ton of time, money, and energy all creating their own version of the spicy sauce that they're using to make the GTI work as well as it does on each of their software. I don't think it's fair, and quite honestly, it would be disrespectful of me to put that out into the public. If you do want to know each of the logs, I highly suggest you purchase each of the company's software and test them for yourself. In regards to how we'll be doing the testing today, every manufacturer will have 3 runs on the dyno. And once we have them up on the screen, we're gonna go with the smoothest of the 3 pulls. In regards to the dyno we are using a Mustang all-wheel drive dyno. We're gonna be using a smoothing level of 6, and the results are going to be uncorrected. Now you guys should know that we are going to be using a dyno jet calibration on this Mustang dyno because we've seen it very closely resemble the results of other dyno jets across North America. Also, I want you guys to know that our stock calibrated Mark 8 GTI ran very similar to APR's results on their stock Mark 8 GTI as well. And now, what are we running for fuel? You can run between an E60 and an E85 blend on all of these tunes. I reached out to all the tuners though to say, hey guys, what's the most optimal level of ethanol I should use to test on my car on the dyno? They all said roughly about E70, except for one that wanted E80 or higher. So what I did is I filled up with pure E85 today to make sure we are getting the most out of the tunes in the dyno. Now, during the disclaimer portion of this video that you guys just saw, I did discuss the fact that I'm using all stock hardware for performance. I do have some shiny bits here and there and some noisemakers, but all stock performance hardware. Now, I had to modify that stock hardware to make sure that my car worked appropriately for this video, and I will quickly explain why that is. I always do some wide open throttle 4th gear data logs prior to getting on the dyno to make sure all of these tunes work properly. For a couple of those tunes, it wasn't working properly. I was getting a drive system malfunction, anywhere from 5700 RPM to 6100 RPM with completely stock hardware. We were confused. We didn't know what was going on because these tunes are specifically designed for stock hardware. So we thought to ourselves, when we reached out to some of the calibrators, what could be the issue? They said maybe it needs more airflow. So what we did is we cut into the stock air intake system, the duct here, to allow for more airflow. Went out, did another 4th gear pull, and it worked. No more issues. I do want to give credit to Unitronic though, because we went out with completely stock hardware with no modification made to this box, and their software worked perfectly. But there were some other ones that had some issues. Now, the final thing to discuss about this video that is going to be a little different than the other videos is we're not doing a stock baseline run today. That's because the car's filled with E85 and we'd grenade my motor on a stock tune running straight ethanol. So what I've done is I've gone through the extensive database that we have here at RG about all of the stock runs that we've done. And I found one that was kind of in the middle that had a decently smooth curve. So this is going to be our stock run, which I've done on a previous day here, running 93 octane fuel. I made 242 wheel horsepower and 283 wheel torque. That's going to be our baseline today. Now, before I get to choosing which company is going to go first, I'm going to give you a quick little education on how to read a dyno graph. These numbers here only correspond to the peak figures we see. This 242 wheel horsepower only represents this tiny little spot on the graph. This 283 wheel torque only represents this tiny little spot on the graph. There is so much more to look at. Your torque, you'd like to be nice and flat and hold as long as you can. You'd like to see your horsepower peak and go nice and high. Know that if you see a really high torque figure down low, the car's gonna feel fast. But if you have a really high horsepower up here, the car's actually gonna be fast when you're racing. Now, to keep things fair and to keep things even, I'm gonna do the same method that I did on the previous videos on today's video. In this bag, there are a bunch of pieces of paper with the logos of each of the companies on it. I'm gonna shake it all up and one by one, pick them out, and that's the order we're gonna be testing in today. So let's see who's first, wherever the hell they are. There's one. Number 1 on the dyno today. Unitronic. Unitronic going number 1. If this is an indication of how today's gonna go, I'm going to be a very, very happy camper. Unitronic's out of the way, and we made so much power. I was totally wrong about what I said in the last video about not making much more. This is incredible. Let's take a look at the graph. 122 wheel horsepower gain and 123 wheel torque gain from what we just did with the stage 1 E85 file to stock on 93 octane. Look at those curves. Holy moly, that's a lot of power and a lot of torque. Very, very smooth on both accounts. This is gonna be fun. Unitronic down. Who's gonna be number 2? Number 2 is 034 Motorsport, going number 2. Now, if you watched my last video when I talked about my subjective review on the different tunes of my cars, you may have caught wind of when I tried to do my 100 to 200 and 60 to 130 testing and how it didn't work out and how I constantly have complications. I just had another one. We just finished the Unitronic tune and now we're about to flash the car with 034 software and the immobilizer kicked on. This hasn't happened before. So I reached out to 034 to ask for help and they were immediately on it and said I need to lock the car, get the key away from the car, wait 10-15 minutes and try it again, and by then all the modules should have gone to sleep. So this is the first time this has ever happened with my MK8 GTI, but I just wanted you guys to know there is going to be a little bit of a longer period of time between the testing because of the immobilizer coming on in between the Unitronic and the 034 testing. .034's 3 runs are done. They managed 120 wheel horsepower, which is just shy of what Unitronic achieved, and 86 wheel torque, which is way below what Unitronic achieved. But we've seen in the previous testing here that they like to keep their torque nice and low. Let's take a look at the graph. Now, I can't say that they see the exact same flat torque curve that they had before. There was quite a bit of up and down on that run. You can see it also dip at the exact same portion at about 4,100 RPM. Both the torque and the horsepower drop slightly before they head back up till they reach peak horsepower, which is about at 5,300 RPM. Number 3, let's see who comes up. United Motorsport, number 3. United Motorsport is done. They made 113 wheel horsepower and 96 wheel torque over stock. That puts them with the lowest horsepower so far, but kind of right in the middle with the wheel torque. Let's take a look at the graph. Once again, they've done it. This was pretty consistent for all 3 runs. Really, really nice and smooth. Extremely smooth power band. Not quite as high as Unitronic, but very, very smooth. Only 2 more to go. Who is number 4? Number 4 is APR. APR's 3 runs are done. They made 111 wheel horsepower and 85 wheel torque over stock, putting them at the lowest wheel horsepower and the lowest wheel torque so far today by just a smidge. Let's take a look at the graph. The torque looks reasonably flat, but we do have this weird dip at about 3,300 RPM before it flattens itself out. The horsepower in roughly the same area also takes a dip, flattens out, and then up top at about 5,100 RPM, you get this weird bump up in horsepower. It's not as smooth or as linear as the other tunes. And there's only one more to go, and that would be Tunezilla. Oh, if I can open this. Number 5 and final. Let's see what they can do. We've We've wrapped up the final tune of the day with Tunezilla. We made 120 wheel horsepower and 128 wheel torque, the highest torque level of the day, and tied for second for their wheel horsepower. Let's take a look at the graph and see how they did. Reasonably smooth curves. You get a bit of up and down, but nothing too severe. Their horsepower does look nice and smooth all the way up to red line. A pretty damn good looking graph from Tunezilla. If you guys really appreciate all the hard work I put into these videos and you want to support the channel and you really like what Tunezilla has done, go to tunezilla.com, use promo code VANCITYAUDI and save yourself 15%. Now that we have it wrapped up, let's take a look at the top 3 performances for wheel horsepower. Number 1 being Unitronic, number 2 being Tunezilla, and tied with 034 Motorsport for number 3. The only reason I put Tunezilla as number 2 and 034 as number 3 is because of the torque differences. Torque is much higher on Tunezilla. So this solid line is Unitronic, the smoothest of these 3 companies. Very, very nice linear power band. Tunezilla does peak a little higher, but is definitely more wavy than Unitronic's is. Then you have 034 from the lower and the middle portion of the run is much lower than the other 2. But what you see is at about 5,200 RPM, all 3 of the tunes match up and are reasonably close up top. But an awesome performance today by Unitronic. And for the final comparison of the day, we're going to be comparing the 3 highest wheel torques of the day. Number 1 going to Tunezilla, number 2 going to Unitronic, and number 3 going to United Motorsports. What we see on the graph again is some waviness up top from Tunezilla, and then it tapers off. Unitronic and United Motorsports are very, very smooth, but Unitronic is significantly higher than United Motorsports. In terms of the horsepower, we see all 3 taking off nicely, but we do notice that United Motorsport trails below the other 2 in the low range and the mid range. Not until you get up to that special level of 5,200 RPM do they kind of all meet up, but we do see up top that Tunezilla produces more horsepower and more wheel torque than the other 2 tunes. Can you believe it, guys? I never thought I'd be able to say this, but my stage 1 low torque comparisons on my MK8 GTI are finally done. No more software changes. Now it's time to upgrade the hardware, which will start in the videos to come. What we saw today was a difference of only 11 wheel horsepower at peak, from the highest performing to the lowest performing tune. Regardless of what software you go with, you're getting a ton of power on E85. I'm first to admit when I'm wrong, and I was so wrong. In my subjective review video, I didn't think we were gonna make a bunch more power. We made so much more power than we did on 93 octane. I'm really excited to keep modding this car, keep this train rolling, and see how much more power we can make, and eventually get it to the drag strip and start racing with it this season. I really appreciate you all for watching this tuner battle series. It will continue shortly with the hardware mods. Thank you all so very much for watching, and until next time, take care.